Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where every week I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar take turns coming up with a topic from history that the other person doesn't know about and maybe hasn't heard about. So today it's my turn. And for my topic, I actually want to talk about chariots, which I'm sure you've heard of before, right? Obviously.
You mean the horse racing kind?
Well, yeah, that's one kind, yeah.
Okay.
Right. And of course, they also used to be used in war.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, I wanted to do this because my older son, was asking me how come people stopped using chariots. We know why people stopped using carriages. Carriages were made obsolete when cars were invented. But chariots fell out of use way before carriages did, because if you notice, like during the 1800s, there's still no cars, but chariots are no longer used in warfare. Have you ever heard of chariots being used during the 1800s?
No, you still had the cavalry, but
Right.
yeah.
But why not chariots?
I have no idea. Good point.
Yeah, I had no idea either. So here's what I found out. I found out a few things. So how chariots came in and out of use. Um, so chariots were not the first vehicles with wheels. In ancient Mesopotamia, in the Sumerian civilization, they had ox carts. And I believe that the Indus Valley culture also had ox carts. So around 2600 BC, the Sumerians used this thing called a battle wagon, or at least that's what we call it retroactively. And the battle wagon was pulled by donkeys, and it had four solid wheels, like just, a big round solid wheel made out of wood. And in the front, it was higher. And the purpose of this was to basically take nobles, usually men, usually nobility, into the battlefield. And these carts were not used. These wagons were not used in the combat. They were just used as a way to get the more important people there.
Mm-hmm.
And the men would dismount before fighting. So this is considered to be like kind of a proto chariot. And as it happens, there is some pictures of this preserved from the Sumerian culture. So I'll be putting that in the slideshow. Now the actual chariot, as we know it, was supposedly invented by Iranic or Aryan steppe nomads, created probably around the year 2000 BC. And as you recall, we talked about, like in Hyperborea and then with the Amazons and such, the area of what is today Russia used to be full of these Iranic cultures called Scythians, and the Indo-Aryans would have started somewhere in there as well. And of course, later on, those people all get pushed out by the Turks. But these are the people that supposedly invented the first chariot. So they were also the first people who supposedly domesticated horses, and they invented the spoked wheel. The wheel that's got it's makes the vehicles more maneuverable and lighter than having a solid wheel, like a solid chunk of wood.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's actually a huge innovation, having a spoked wheel. And these are the guys that thought of it. And the early chariots had two wheels, which were spoked. And usually they would have one driver and then one archer inside the chariot. So around 1700 BC, chariot archers began to use this thing called a composite bow. Have you heard of the composite bow before?
It sounds very familiar, but
Yeah.
or don't they still use them for hunting?
Yes, today people still use a composite bow, hobbyists, but I think it's made out of different stuff than the ancient world version, the original version. Like
So
the original.
Why did they call it composite?
Because good question. Because the ancient original bow of the ancient world was just one piece of wood with a string on it. It was one carved piece of wood. So the composite bow is made up of a few different parts. So it includes wood, animal horn, and muscle tissue. I believe the string was made out of the animal's muscle tissue. And it could shoot twice as far as the original solid wood bow. And chariot archers could fire these bows every 6 seconds. So these are combining, a couple of innovations at once: domestication of horses, spoked wheel, composite bow. And then there's a fourth innovation that comes as a response to this. Do you have any idea what that would be?
Comes as a response to composite bow.
Yeah. Body armor.
Okay, I was going to say shields, but I think those are pretty old. Okay, body
Yeah,
armor.
they already had shields in the ancient world. Like you would see guys like the ancient Egyptians and the Sumerians, they would make use of shields, but they didn't have any armor, or if they did, it was usually just a helmet. So you start getting like a chest plate and then more in response to the composite bow. And of course, I did a video on this, the history of armor, on my other channel. So then in 1650 BC, the Hyksos take over Egypt, and they actually are the ones that introduced the chariot into Egypt. And I've heard different things about the Hyksos, like that they were Semitic, but one of the sources that I was looking at said that they were Amorites and Hurrians mixed together. Amorites are, I'm pretty sure, Semitic. Hurrians are not. And then in 1650 BC, let me make sure I'm going in the right order. There's a guy named Hattusilus. He creates a powerful Hittite state in the area of Anatolia, like what today we call Anatolia. And then his successor, whose name is Mercillus, takes over northern Syria. And of course, back then it would be Aram. I'm not sure they would have called it Syria, but Aram is mentioned a lot in the Bible, and the Hittites are mentioned a bit as well. So in 1595 BC, Mercillus takes an army and raids deep into Mesopotamia, and he sacks Babylon, and he carries off a statue of Marduk as he goes back, Marduk. So he's able to do this because of chariots, and the Sumerians are not adequately prepared for that. And then in 1550, the Hurrians found the Mitanni kingdom in northern Mesopotamia. And the Mitanni are actually a very big and significant empire during the Bronze Age, and they used to exchange spouses with the Egyptians. So they would intermarry with each other frequently in order to prevent a war. But of course, the Mitanni culture does not survive the Bronze Age collapse, which come later. So even though the Hurrians and the Hittites were the main early adopters of the chariot, like they were the first people that were definitively recorded as having used it, they were not the originators of the technology. So it started in the area of what today we would call Russia by these Iranic cultures. And the Mitanni aristocracy and chariot warriors had Aryan names, and they worshipped Indra, Varuna, and Mithra. So, Indra and Varuna today mainly exist in India as part of Hinduism, and Mithra was part of the old Zoroastrian system. And of course, Mithra also was symbolized with the swastika. But anyway, so there was a record, or not actually I say a record, there's like I guess an instruction manual or an essay or something about how to train chariot horses. And it comes from the Mitanni realm, but it was translated into Hittite, translated from the Hurrian speech. And there were a bunch of words which were like Aryan, in some type of Aryan language that so there were no original like Hurrian equivalencies of those. And this has to do with the fact that they were innovations that were not made by the Hurrians. So they were technical terms made by these Iranic cultures from the steppes. So continuing on, it seems like during this time period, there was we've talked about the Aryan invasion of India before, which a lot of people right now in India are trying to deny and say never happened. But it looks like, based on my research, that they didn't just invade India, but also the Middle East as well. And they brought chariots with them wherever they went. So yeah, however you want to slice it, migration or invasion, I guess I've seen it referred to as both. I guess a migration is an invasion that you officially sanction, and an invasion would be unsanctioned. And most of these Aryan invaders or migrants, whatever, they do assimilate into the host culture. For the most part, of course, in India, they become a dominant ruling class. So the Aryan invasion of India happens around 1500 BC. And around 1600 BC, another group of chariot riders takes over Greece. And these guys are Indo-Europeans. I'm not sure who they were. I tried to find out. I thought maybe they might be the Dorians, but it doesn't look like that's the case.
Well, what's the big advantage of these chariot riders? Why are they so successful? Was there no defense against them?
There was no defense against them. That's why different cultures started to develop armor.
Okay.
So you'd have a line of infantry, and they would come with at the start of the battle, they'd come with their chariots, and they would have archers in the chariot, and they'd run along and shoot you.
So the big advantage is that you can shoot while riding those horses, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would speed by and take pot shots at you.
It's like a ancient drive-by shooting kind of.
Exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
Okay.
So it was a nightmare for these cultures that were unprepared for it.
Yeah.
Which was pretty much anybody that they encountered. So it looks like when the Aryans
to get an idea of or why the chariot became obsolete, actually, but I won't spoil that. I won't ruin your unless you want me to.
Well, I'm getting to that.
Okay,
So
I'll let you continue. Okay.
Yeah, because we don't want to spoil it for the viewers. Yeah. Maybe not.
Okay.
So so this chariot spreads basically, and Egypt continues to use the chariots after the Hyksos are gone, and they mainly use them defensively in order to protect their infantry from, I guess, other chariots. And in 1274 BC, there's a huge battle called the Battle of Kadesh, which happens between the Hittites versus the Egyptians. So the Hittites and the Egyptians, they used to fight a lot with each other over the control of the area that would later become Israel and Syria. So that area would kind of pass between them back and forth. And I believe this was all before the Israelites left and settled that area. But yeah, it used to be that the Arameans were kind of at the mercy of Hittites and Egyptians for a while. So the Hittites, they made heavier chariots, which were designed to smash through lines of infantry and kind of run people over. The Egyptians made lighter chariots. So between 5,000 and 6,000 chariots were in this battle. And the Egyptians won because their chariots were more maneuverable. But the Hittites ended up holding on to the Syrian territory, which was what they were fighting over to begin with. And then the Assyrians had a special branch of experts and I guess engineers who would travel with the army in order to maintain chariots. And they also would train, they had specialists to train the men in the use of chariots. And these guys were the first soldiers to be selected for skills rather than because of their birth, like status as nobility, like they could be anybody.
Mm.
And the Assyrians had, and of course, I think I mentioned in one of the older videos that the Assyrians are the first culture in our world to create a professional army. Because most cultures, they would just go to war and they'd be like, all right, we're going, come with us, it's time, and you'd have to go. But the Assyrians actually had a professional army, meaning that was their job year round. So they weren't like normally farmers or something, and they were normally soldiers.
So they predate the Spartans?
Good question. I guess so. I think
Yeah.
So. Yeah. I mean, the
They,
Greeks
they were also full-time.
Yeah, the Greeks had some dark ages, which that we could probably handle better in a separate video.
Yeah.
But I know they had at least the Dorians. They caused one, and apparently, I think there was another one apart from that. I should know that, but I'm not really sure.
We should also do a video around the Bronze Age collapse at some point. But anyway.
Oh yeah, I agree. That's been on my mind too, actually. Yeah. So then around 1000.
So I'm guessing the Assyrians did really well because they were the first with a professional army based on meritocracy, which they probably ended up smashing their enemies, right?
Yeah, they smashed their enemies and fill the land with blood and burn people alive, skin people alive, all that kind of stuff, which we talked about with Ashurnasirpal II, who boasted about that. But of course, Ashurnasirpal was not the only Assyrian to do that kind of stuff. That was just what they did. They make the Axis powers of World War II look like candy canes and gumdrops by comparison in terms of their brutality. And interestingly, nobody gets triggered by the Assyrians today. So you could walk into some store wearing like a beard and a robe and a round hat, and nobody would care. Well, they might care, but they wouldn't be triggered by it.
It's probably because all the Assyrian enemies, like most of them, are no longer around.
Well, Jews are still around.
The Jews, yeah.
And the Arameans are still around, kind of, Syria. But the Assyrians, they never, once their empire was crushed, they never rose up again. They still exist, even today over in Iraq. They're no longer brutal, but they do still exist. So, but at any rate, so around 1000 BC is when chariots start to kind of go into decline. People use them less. And part of the reason is because they were difficult to maintain, and their use is also limited based on the type of terrain that you're dealing with. So they're better for fighting out in the open if there's a lot of, if the ground is very uneven, and if there's a lot of forest and other obstacles, they're not so practical. And
probably didn't have the best suspension in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so
eventually,
if you're like going for like mountainous terrain and you have giant rocks and stuff, you're probably better off just either on foot or just on a horse, I'm guessing. But yeah.
That's right. And actually, cavalry is what replaces chariots ultimately. And according to some of my sources, when horses were first domesticated, they're not strong enough to carry soldiers on their backs. Perhaps, yeah, that's kind of weird, right? I don't know if I believe that entirely. It could be true.
Could be. I mean, just look at dogs nowadays, like how much they've been changed, or cows compared to, like the original ancient cows.
Yeah.
If you keep the breeding special characteristics, could be. That's not what I was thinking of, though. Am I allowed to say what I think was created the downfall? Was it the stirrup?
No, well, no.
Because with the stirrups, you can fire a bow while riding a horse, right?
When was the first stirrup invented?
Didn't the Mongolians invent the stirrup, or was it the Oh, wait, what was that? The people in that ended up what is now in Hungary. They were
The
the
Magyars,
Huns.
Huns.
The Huns. Didn't they invent the stirrups?
I don't
What?
know. I should know that, but I don't. Now I'm gonna have to do
Okay.
another video on the stirrup.
Okay. Sorry. All right. No, I thought it was a stirrup. It's not. So which what was
It's
your what
because
was the reason?
they made bigger horses.
Hmm.
They were breeding bigger and stronger horses for various reasons. Part of the reason, I guess, was to pull more powerful chariots, but then they decided, we'll just put our soldiers on the backs of the horses instead.
Mm.
So it gradually, because they had bigger and better horses, they began to transition from chariots to cavalry. And so but still there's a few final uses of chariots. So in China, the chariot fell out of use during the Warring States period, which is 476 to 221 BC. I'm not sure when they stopped using it in India. I should know that, but I don't. And then in 331 BC, there was this battle between the Persians and the Greeks, led by Alexander the Great, called the Battle of Gaugamela. Gaugamela. Wait, Gaugamela. Gaugamela. Um,
I
I'm
think
probably still.
guacamole is something else. It's something you get at a Mexican restaurant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could be jacking it up still, but
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
basically, this is the last battle that chariots were used in the Middle East. So
Around what year was this?
it's 331 BC.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So Darius III ordered his chariots to crash through the Greek infantry line, and the Greeks, what they did is they just opened their lines and allowed the chariots to pass through, and then they surrounded them and they killed them. And I found out, I thought at first maybe this was the last ever battle with chariots, but it looks like there was a battle in 83 AD called the Battle of Mons Graupius, where chariots were used against the Romans. And it looks like this is probably the last battle, the last chariot battle. So the Battle of Mons Graupius is a battle between the Romans and the Picts. And the Romans were led by a guy named Agricola, and the Picts were led by Calgacus. And according to Tacitus, the historian, 10,000 Picts were killed, while the Romans only lost 360 men. And I have a quote here from Tacitus, what he says. In the meantime, the troops of cavalry took flight, and the armed chariots mingled in the engagement of the infantry. But also their first shock occasioned some consternation. They were soon entangled among the close ranks of the cohorts and the inequalities of the ground. Not the least was left of an engagement of cavalry. Wait, not the least. Oh, sorry, not the least appearance was left of an engagement of cavalry, since the men, long keeping their ground with difficulty, were forced along with the bodies of the horses, and frequently straggling chariots and affrighted horses without their riders, flying variously as terror impelled them, rushing obliquely athwart or directly through the lines. So basically, the chariots, they try to just rush into the lines of Roman soldiers, kind of like what the Persians did.
Hmm.
But instead of destroying the lines, they get all jacked up by them, and they're not able to get away. They're not able to disentangle themselves, or they get slaughtered, and horses as well, I would suppose. So the Romans, they never really used chariots apart from the games and the races, right?
Yeah.
And the Byzantines would still use them. You talked about that in one of
Hmm.
Blues versus the Greens.
Yeah.
And the Greeks didn't make much use of them. Like Alexander the Great, he didn't use them. I suppose they were used in ancient Greek world because they're in the mythology, like Apollo has a chariot and such. But yeah, like Romans, they had their troops all close together. They made use of infantry and cavalry. So chariots, and they were armored troops, whereas the Picts, they didn't really have any armor. So they
Yeah,
just
although I
got,
think Roman cavalry was mostly with swords and like spears, right? Not so much with bow.
yeah, they didn't use bows. I don't, yeah, so the Mongols, they would put bowmen on the horse.
Yeah, and
Romans.
I was thinking about like other I was thinking like what about Hannibal? Like did he use chariots? But he used elephants, I guess, in a similar way to storm the lines. But it was also to break open the line, not so much to avoid or to shoot from a distance and do those drive-by shootings, which is different. So,
I
and
don't.
plus that was also from until like the second century BC. So, yeah.
Well, the native people of Great Britain were still using chariots when the Romans invaded. Like Queen Boudica, she would use a chariot during the.
Oh yeah, but they just weren't very efficient anymore. Yeah.
No, and it doesn't seem like England is a very good place for chariots, anyways, judging by what I've seen of the land. Um,
You have
so
a lot of
the
flat areas around London anyway, a lot of green flat areas. So
okay,
I don't know. I don't know about the rest. Probably up north towards Scotland, you have mountains and stuff, but
the
the
Picts are
Highlands.
Scots. They're like the
Yeah.
Scots people. So I'm thinking probably these people were late adopters of the chariot and also late users of them, and they just got run over by the Romans. Of course, the Romans never took all of Scotland, but they took the lower half of the island.
Yeah.
And I don't know about Hannibal. The in India, they were still using war elephants when the English were there, when they were fighting with the English, which we
Hmm.
talked about some of that in my other video about how the English took over India. So, but then cavalry was still used. Of course, horse cavalry was still used, and the English used it, and the Indians used it as well. And the Indians were making heavy use of cavalry when Shivaji was there, but of course, chariots were long gone. Oh, I forgot to mention the Persians. They actually put blades on their chariot wheels so they could cut people up as they're going along. Scythe chariots. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's all I got. Now I know the answer to this question of why they were phased out.
Basically, they were replaced by stronger horses and cavalry. Yeah, makes
Yeah,
sense.
you can go a
Yeah.
lot more places with a horse than you can with a chariot.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think what you have in modern day times still as weaponry that's still maybe a little bit similar is like the artillery that you saw for a while. I think they were also pulling artillery like Napoleon was by behind horses, where it would just be two wheels with a gun mounted on it. And
Right,
I think
but
I
they
think they
weren't
were
pull.
yeah, there wasn't anybody like riding on it. It was just like a mobile gun or a mobile turret and a howitzer, I guess. But the idea was somewhat similar. Like you would try to maneuver or outmaneuver your opponent and fire at them from a distance and then move it again before they could get close. Um, anyway, my battle tactics might be off, but I was just trying to think of like how they were using it. And one other thing I wanted to ask you about Mithra. Is that in any way related to Mithril from Lord of the Rings?
Not at all.
Okay, sorry, because talking about body armor and things like that. So okay, all right, cool. No, I appreciate the story. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. It wouldn't
Yeah,
surprise me, and I think you do need to follow up at some point with a story around the stirrup and its role in battle tactics, because I'm pretty sure that also allowed you. I think it was the either the Huns or the Mongolians that were able to fire arrows from as they were riding the horse.
Yeah, Mongolians would fire forwards and backwards as they were riding the horses. That's how they decimated so many other armies, including Europeans who had better armor and gear. But, like we would be chasing them. They'd fire some arrows, and then we would chase them. And then as we were chasing them, they'd be running away, firing the arrows at us as they go. So, they really jacked up a lot of people, the Mongols. It'd be worth it to do some videos onto Mongols as well, showing how
Yeah.
they spread and because just about they conquered a lot of cultures which were much older and more advanced than they were, but they did it. Also, cultures that were more numerous. So it's worth looking into. Like they conquered more of the world than any other empire, except for maybe the Soviet Union.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, although you could say the same about Alexander the Great conquering Persia,
Well,
which was
his territory was not as big as the Mongols, and
no, yeah.
of
You
course
know,
he.
it's that's like the rise and fall of empires being tied to these battle tactics and new technologies, or new, coming together. Like you said, we domesticate the horse, and then we invent the wheel, and then we invent the spoke, and then we combine those technologies, and then we combine it with the bow, and then with the composite bow, and then all of a sudden you have like a advantage over your opponent, until you get somebody else that's maybe comes up with a bigger horse, and they come up or with a new technique, defense mechanism, like the Romans did, and it renders your invention obsolete, and then your empire falls apart all of a sudden. And stuff like that could still happen, actually, or and it's most likely will happen in the future. Like in right now, the US is a lot of like huge carrier planes, ships, like what do you call them, the air
Aircraft
carriers.
carriers.
Yeah, and but now you have these new technologies, and we don't know how they will fare, but they are, like these hypersonic missiles, using scramjet technology and whatnot, that go like Mach 7 or Mach 8 and up, and there's like virtually no defense against them. Like, how will that upset the balance if we have a
Lasers. They're gonna have to
yeah.
use lasers to take those things
Yeah,
out.
exactly, because there's no missile can take it out. So it might totally upset the balance of power. So it's still interesting how these new developments might and probably will shape the future of our societies.
Yeah, I mean the way I see it is, I'm not really looking forward to the future. I don't have a lot of optimism. But one thing is major innovation at the end of World War II. That's when the first, or near the end of it, that's when the first atomic bombs were developed. And of course, that's what ended the war. The reason we haven't had another, it's been almost 100 years since World War II. World War II started in 1939. And the reason we haven't had another of these things is because if any major powers goes to war, it's going to escalate to nukes, and nukes will destroy everything. So, like, the United States is definitely in a decline phase. And say somebody hits us with hypersonic missiles like China or something like that.
Hmm.
Well, then there's all sorts of submarines prowling the ocean that have nuclear missiles on them,
Yeah.
and that's what's going to happen next. So, like, if anybody destroys the United States, then the nuclear submarines are going to retaliate as a matter of course, and then that country will be destroyed. And then probably the whole world is going to have to deal with cancer and mutations and birth defects, because that radiation, it doesn't stay localized. It's going to move around. It's going to wreck at least the whole northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
So, yeah, future wars, I don't know how it's going to be. I'm just going to save my speculation for now. It doesn't look like we're going to go into space. So I don't, yeah, I don't know.
We'll see. We'll see about that. If we are, it's probably going to come from the private sector and not from the government.
Yeah,
So
it'll be this corporation and that corporation, and it'll be probably kind of dystopian.
yeah, it's a whole other dystopian novel, but at least it'll be interesting because we'll be going to space.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be so old by the time, you know,
Yeah,
they won't
unfortunately.
they
Yeah.
won't send us anyways. They'll send like even if they had that capability now, they're going to send specialists first, and then people like us.
It's a bummer for us sci-fi geeks that we're either born. Seems like we're either born too late or too soon. So anyway,
there's a meme about that as well.
Thanks, Ivor. I appreciate it. Thanks for the topic, and I think it was a good one. Yeah.
Great. Leave us if anybody has any questions or comments. Do leave us. We haven't had that much feedback, but we do take all the feedback seriously. So, alrighty.
Good.
That's all I got.